UHP2, what does that mean? So ultra high performance revision 2. So that's what that was for. And the reason why we did that was, you imagine many, many years ago, what was happening was in the early 70s, people were putting 1300, 1600 cross-flow engines in them. They were maybe putting, you know, the odd kind of Pinto. These were ranged from 75 horsepower to maybe 110. It's not about the horsepower, it's about the torque, and that is the big thing. And obviously, you look at us now, for example, our EcoBoost is 285 foot-pounds of torque. Now, what does that really mean? So if you were lucky enough to own a Sierra Cosworth in its heyday, that had near enough 200 foot-pounds of torque. So you can see the difference between the two, you know, a massive amount of torque demand on these cars. Our philosophy is, we believe that the chassis really need to be stiffened up to cope with the horsepower and to also reduce flexing as well. So what we did with the UHP2 was we quite literally put a lot of additional bracing in it, mainly around just the suspension areas around here. And obviously the big one was actually just in the differential assembly itself. Because if you imagine for the diff trying to handle that torque, it's maybe got, you know, you're going around corners, you've got the torque demand, a little bit of wheel spin, setting off quickly. You know, there's so much turning power, pulling power in the back of that. And that's basically why we did a UHP2. And here's two different types of box section here. You have a lightweight thin wall tubing. And this here is something that we use in our vehicles, and you can see here it's a thick wall tubing. Really, what's the difference? Well, believe it or not, that is 40% more tensile strength than the thinner variant, and that's a big difference. So this is an SP5 and a UHP2. The UHP3 is a different steel altogether. But what it is, the steel actually takes you back to a thin wall, but it's a better grade of steel that actually means it's actually got a higher tensile strength than this. Now, the difference between the two tensile strengths between your thin wall tubing and our thick wall tubing is 40%. So it makes a massive difference to the actual strength of that chassis. And from a safety point of view as well, is that, you know, if you were ever involved in an accident and you ended up going off the road, you know, obviously if you've got a stronger chassis assembly itself, you know, it is going to protect you as an individual, as basically a driver, you know. And, you know, one of the other advantages with these little sidebars here is that when you actually look at them, you know, if you were actually ever unfortunate enough to roll the car over, you've got a nice arc from here. The other advantage with that particular design of cage is that if you're ever unfortunate enough to have an impact along the side, and if you notice the way that the bars are here, then effectively what they're doing is they're actually deflecting whatever it is away from you. So, you know, you almost have this scenario where it's pushing it away. So effectively what you built is, you built a nice little safety cell around yourself. And again, you know, this is RLPT 51, this is proper roll cage tubing.